Welcome back, everybody. Episode number 30 of the Roses and Rhetoric podcast. Our show, we don't say podcast anymore. Off to a great start. If anybody's curious, this is a Friday. And of course, normally we do our shows on Saturdays. And doing it a day early gave us less time to prepare. And so if you enjoy watching improv crash and burn, don't change that dial. Joining me as always, my charming co-host,
Joseph Stanford.
Very good. Well, Joe, I had a good week, and I always want to check in with you to see how your week's going.
Good week. Was spent the majority of the week recovering from my most recent San Francisco trip, where we interviewed, of course, Dr. Guy Bouvier.
Bouvier.
If you haven't checked out that episode, go check it out. Number 29.
And it was a good episode. It was a good episode. I had a lot of fun talking to Guy. If anybody's curious, I did in fact say his last name wrong every single time on that episode. And I do apologize for that. But he was a wonderful guest, and I had a lot of fun talking about that. So I was talking about our show the other day to somebody, and the way that I explained it, or the way that I said what motivates us to do the show, among other reasons, is that it gives us an excuse to explore topics we probably wouldn't learn about otherwise. And I think the episode with Guy last week was a good example of that.
Yeah, no, Guy was an excellent example of that. I know neuroscience is something that we've always been interested in, and it seems like we've just stumbled across the resources to be able to learn it.
Yeah, stumbling is correct. I was thinking about, and of course, Guy had a really good, a very good talent for explaining complex things to the audience. But for anybody who's curious, one of the episodes we're putting together, this will come out a little bit later on, but it's going to be kind of an intro neuroscience video that we're going to put together to kind of help explain some of the background to the episodes that we do about neuroscience as a topic. And so if you're watching those episodes and they're a little confusing, join the club. That would be the same for Joe and myself as well. And we recognize that and are working with one of our friends, Cameron Wellhite, actually, to kind of build kind of an intro video to make those other episodes more comprehensible to the people that are just listening, that haven't had the ability to go and actually read the material that we're discussing on the shows. But I thought it was a great time. I really enjoy learning how the brain works, and I still don't really have any idea how the brain works. But I'm glad to know smart people like you are working on those questions. Great radio content. No, I was going to say I did have one topic I wanted to branch off of that geek conversation, and it was this. This came up a little bit during the actual episode with him, but it was this idea. We were talking to him about what innovations, what technology made his research possible, and I thought he gave a really interesting answer that I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking today about. And for people who haven't seen that episode, obviously check it out. But just kind of a brief recap here. He does a lot of experiments on mice, but what he was telling us is that the novelty of his approach wasn't having a unique instrument or a unique technology, but he found a unique way to combine already existing technologies. And I think that seems to me, if somebody is going to be the garage inventor or something like that, I would imagine most of those people are probably innovating through that way, combining already existing things rather than really reaching the edge of some knowledge barrier and progressing forward from it. I guess that just seems kind of intuitive to me that's how they would do it. And I was thinking of the example that we gave a few episodes back about the briefcase on wheels, that the person who invented that didn't invent the wheel or the briefcase, but he found a way to combine both of them into a novel technology. And it was that combination that had eluded people until that person invented it.
Yeah, so it's like just finding two maybe seemingly unrelated aspects of neuroscience in this example and combining them together to create new findings and new learnings.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying, if you enjoy watching improv crash and burn, don't change that dial. No, we actually have a lot of good things to talk about today. So I know we have a new segment coming up in a little bit. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Before getting that though, I did want to always give credit to one of our, frequently talked about authors on the show, Nassim Taleb, talking about the Black Swan. I finished rereading the Black Swan this week. I actually bought a new copy. This is the second edition of the book. For people who don't know, I did not know this until I bought this version, but he did publish a second edition of the Black Swan and included behind the main text a series of essays that were quite enjoyable on the Black Swan. And one of the things that he gives in those back essays is kind of like, 10 lessons from the Black Swan, or like, 10 things to do with Black Swans. And so if you enjoy those kind of like top 10 lists or something like that, this book is a nice addition as well. But I wanted to talk about one problem that comes up in the Black Swan that I thought is an interesting problem. And it's this idea with how we use our intuition and the knowledge that we have to make predictions about the past, not about the future, but about how we make these guesses about the past. And the example in the book that he gives involves ice cubes melting on a sidewalk. And so if you've been alive for more than a few years and you see somebody put an ice cube on the street, with all certainty that ice cube will melt into a puddle. Really no ambiguity, really no concern that that's not going to happen. That'll happen every time. On the other hand, if you are observing a puddle and someone tells you that it came from an ice cube and you imagine what that ice cube was shaped like, you really have no idea. That's just a pure guess. You really can't extrapolate back from the puddle to the shape of the ice, nor could you go from the puddle even knowing that it was ice. That puddle could have come from anywhere, even though you can project forward from the ice cube melting to the puddle. You can't go back from the puddle to the ice cube. And that's interesting because normally we think that it's harder to predict the future than it is to predict the past. But in this example, it's actually the opposite. The future is very easy to predict, the past very hard to predict. And so when we're faced with a situation of trying to look at some occurrence in our modern frame, and we're trying to understand where it came from, it's very easy to give ourselves narratives that make sense. But just remember that any number of infinite narratives could converge onto whatever space you happen to be observing. And that it may be the case that actually the forward projection is easier to do than the backward projection. And I thought that was neat because I had never really thought of that problem before. And like I said, usually we talk about error in forward projection, but here's an example where in fact that is turned on its head a little bit.
It's like forensic analysis, like studying like crimes or cold cases or something like that.
Right.
Where that is the actual art of studying the past and what had happened in the past.
Yep.
So yeah, I could see how that would be equally as unpredictable as predicting the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess was one more topic on the Black Swan, and I was thinking about this more just as it relates to book reading in general. But I think I mentioned this before, but I'm trying to get in a habit of seeing the ending of a book as kind of the beginning of that journey rather than the ending of that journey. And basically, the idea is that once you finish a book, the next question should always be, how can you apply it to your life? And I think all of us can get in a bad habit. I know that I certainly have, but getting in a bad habit of once you finish a book, you put it on the shelf and it's like a trophy or something. It's like, all right, on the shelf, done, walk away, and it may never have any impact on you again. I'm curious what your thoughts are on ways of avoiding that, ways of trying to make books more actionable to get more out of reading them. Because I know you and I have both had this problem before.
Yeah, no, that's a tough one. Personally, for me, I find that if I try to remember every single thing that's mentioned in a book and I try to start like applying everything that I read in that book to the T, it kind of drives me like crazy. And it's just, it seems infeasible. But I think recently my approach has been more along the lines of, okay, let me read through this book. Let me read it in a way that my subconscious is processing it, so that maybe it's not like my thinking mind, my prefrontal cortex that's processing the information. Maybe it's going somewhere deeper, like to some subconscious level, and that's where the real learning exists. Or at least that's my theory. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But and then doing things like rereading a book is just more emphasis on that subconscious. And then you don't get all stressed out for like forgetting what you read and like applying it.
I like that approach. I definitely think that there is something about trying to figure out how to make a lesson in a book more of a habit than a conscious, conceptual thought that you're having. And I think the only way of doing that, of making it a habit, I guess in a way you would think by doing something over and over again, you would hope that it just becomes a habit, that it gets embedded into your thinking process without you having to actually make the effort. You just begin thinking this way, because especially when you're talking all the traps that you can fall into that Nassim Taleb talks about, or Scott Adams or Cialdini, it's too much to remember everything. I mean, you're not going to remember every logical fallacy,
every detail.
You're not going to remember it. That would be insane. I think what's better is, one, understanding the general premise of the books, the idea that mental biases exist. Just that knowledge alone can ground you in a situation, so you're not assuming that you're approaching it with this perfectly objective framework, but that you have other forces at work behind the scenes. I think that helps. And I think also what's nice too is that in these books, whether it be Nassim or Scott Adams or Cialdini, they always give really good examples. And those anecdotes make it easier to remember. You can remember, Nassim talking about a funny story that happened to him involving something with the Black Swan. And that helps stick in your mind a little bit. It's this idea that, and this is why, religious books all have parables. In the Bible or the Quran or any other important religious text would have a lot less meaning if it was just a list of things not to do. But it's embedded behind the story that you can read and understand, and the characters bring these decisions to life. And through essentially having a relationship with a character, it makes those stories more entertaining. The way that Nassim writes, I mean, it's very personal. It's not very formal, and so it sounds like a conversation, and that makes it in a way stick in your head more. At least that's what I found. And I would say that the same is true with Adams and with Cialdini as well. They make it personal, and it sticks with you because of it.
Yeah, and the telling the stories or through parables, it makes it anchored in your brain, and it's more digestible by stupid people, right?
Yes, which is all of us. Which is,
Well, 50% of people have a below average IQ. Let me remind you that.
That's right. I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to take the rereading books more seriously, and I've kind of have been exploring that this past year, and so far it's been good. I always am surprised, although I guess I shouldn't be, but I'm always surprised about how much I just have completely forgotten from these books. Reading the first time, you forget it. I first had that experience when I was I forget what the situation was, but at some point I didn't have internet. This is when I was younger, and I had this box at a Family Guy, and I found that even though I knew that I had watched it all before, that it had been so long that it was as if I hadn't seen it ever, and it was just funny again because I forgot all the punchlines. So a little bit of
yeah, I don't know how they still crank out episodes and still make me laugh every time I watch it.
I know.
And how they get away with some of the things they say on that show.
Yeah, I don't know either.
For being a lefty, Macfarlane says a lot of very, very politically questionable things in that show.
Yeah, Seth Macfarlane, definitely a comedy genius. The writers at South Park, equally genius. I don't know how they come up with it. I know, I should say, if you watch the South Park episode of Cartoon Wars, South Park gives their best attempt at understanding where Family Guy episodes come from. I have enjoyed all of those shows. I grew up with Family Guy, South Park, all those shows are all great. And I don't know how they're still around. I mean, we're only on episode 30, and I'm wondering what are we going to be talking about next week. And they've been doing this for like decades, and so geniuses at work, I guess. But yeah, it's always good. Well, there we go. That was my weekly plug for Nassim Taleb. I really think people should read this guy's books. I talk about them on almost every episode. Probably get most of it wrong. If Nassim ever watches one of these, he's probably just like, "What the hell is he talking about?" Go buy his books. But enough about that, Joe. Enough about that. Let's get to the real reason we're here today, which is our news segment, talking about Joe's briefcase.
Yeah, is that my intro to describe my said briefcase?
Let's do it in 5 minutes. No, of course it is. Of course it is. Yes. No. Let's move on to our new segment, Joe's briefcase. And Joe, tell us where the segment came from and what we can expect.
Okay, so as many of our listeners slash viewers know, and they're very familiar with another one of our segments, or our popular segments called Joe's Inbox, which is always full of surprises. But this week, I'm happy to announce the beta testing or the piloting of a new segment, Joe's Briefcase. And this is, I would like to use this forum to talk about something that is important to me. And it's important to me by the sheer fact that this is where I spend most of my day, which is at work. So today I have prepared some material for how to be successful in corporate America. And a lot of you might remember I wrote a more satirical piece about this a while back. This one's intended to be a little bit more serious, a little bit more pragmatic, have a little bit more, I don't know, realistic advice for people. And I want to keep this piece, this part as non-prescriptive as I can, because I don't think that prescriptions work and that people just generally don't take advice. So
let me cut you off. It's not medical prescriptions, but prescriptive advice, just to clarify Joe's comment there. Anyways, Joe, go ahead.
Well, we'll get to the medical prescriptions later.
Okay.
That's our next segment, Joe's Pillbox.
Yeah, Joe's Pillbox. Joe's medicine cabinet.
Yeah, Joe's medicine cabinet. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Joe's expired toothpaste.
Okay, so I wanted to start this by saying that if you're one of the many people that choose to live in the 9-to-5 slavery, and I say choose because I do believe that it is a choice, I think that this advice will be helpful for you. Good. And I say this based off of 7 years of my own personal experience in a Fortune 50 company, where I have repeatedly outperformed many of my peers and come up to a management position for which a lot of people think that I'm pretty young to be in. So I'm going to share with you some of these tips and tactics that I have developed over the past 7 years. So rule number 1, I would say, is do not be a hero. So a lot of people think that you come to success in a company through accomplishment, right? Like through achieving something, like some flashy achievement or accomplishment that looks good. And then from that point forward, you just live as royalty. So that's not the case. It's much more important to not fuck up than to achieve something. And I think this is the case for everything besides just business.
Right.
So that's rule number 1. And that's the most important. Rule number 2 is this theory that I came up with called act as a lubricant for the system. So your sheer purpose as an employee, if your goal is to succeed and advance, is to lubricate the process. You don't want to slow down any progress. You don't want to be a roadblock. You don't want to be the pinch point for any progress and projects or anything like that. You want to be easy to work with, even if that means like putting your ego aside and telling other people they're right when they're not. That's just got to be daily practice. People got to like you. You got to be stoic. You got to be able to put all that emotion to the side and just say, okay, I'm here to act as a grease for this wheel. And I'm not going to be the pinch point. I'm not going to be the one seizing up the wheel. I'm going to let someone else do that. I'm going to let someone else throw a tantrum and do that, or be emotionally reactive and do that. I'm going to simplify my emails. I'm going to keep them short so people can read them. Right. I'm not going to write novels, like big run-on paragraphs that go on for 12, 15 lines. No, like 2-3 lines max. Get the point across. Make the calls when I need to. Don't slow down progress. So that's rule number 2. And rule number 3 is to schedule routine one-on-ones with your supervisors. And this is important from a persuasion and subconscious reason, because the people you spend the most time around are the people that are going to be on your mind and the people you're going to be thinking about the most. And if you can develop a little comfortable real estate in your supervisor's brain, the bigger that real estate is, the more they're going to think about you and the more that you're going to be on their mind and the more likely that you'll get a raise or get a favorable review at the end of the year. So in these one-on-ones, and a lot of times, like, so supervisors will schedule one-on-ones, and then like the day of, they'll be like, hey, I don't have anything for you. Do you still want to have this? Do you still want to talk? And then most of the time people are like, oh yeah, free hour back. Like, yeah, we don't have to talk. We'll just chat next week. And then same thing next week. But no, I say, don't do that. You always say yes. Yes, you want to talk to the supervisor. You want to meet on a routine basis with the supervisor. And that's going to reap a lot of benefits in the long term, especially if all your peers are falling for it and saying like, oh yeah, I don't have anything. We'll skip it this week. It gives you a leg up in that competition. Because it is a competition, because there's only so much bonus dollars, there's only so many raise dollars, only so many promotions that can be given out each year. Sticking with supervisors, so when you're in these one-on-ones, there is a couple important questions that you can ask to make it worthwhile. So you always want to ask your supervisor at the end of it, say, okay, what help do you need from me? What help do you need from me? And then that messes with the supervisor, because most people don't hear that. Most bosses don't get that. Like, they're used to either delegating, but they're not familiar with when an employee asks that of them. And this actually happened to me before, where I asked a long-time boss at my job, I said, okay, what help do you need from me? And then the boss at the time said, no one's ever asked me that before. And then at that point, I knew I was onto something. So every one-on-one since then, regardless of the manager, regardless of the boss, even for like employees, like I'll ask that of them and see what they say. And I think that pays dividends. But with respect to the supervisor and your interactions with the supervisor, I would advise this framework, that your purpose needs to be to make their job as easy as possible. And I say that because I think, what would I want for my employees? I want my employees to make my job as easy as possible. So what does that mean? That means essentially reducing the friction in the system, acting as a lubrication. Like, when a boss asks you for something, you send the response, and then you send like a follow-up, like, okay, here's the answer. Do you want me to forward this over to this person? Or here's the answer. Do you want me to follow up and collect this data? Or here's the answer. Do you want me to do this? Like, just think, like, what would make your life easier from your employees? Do you want an employee that just does exactly what you asked and doesn't offer to do the rest of it? Or do you want an employee that's going to do your job for you? I don't know. I would pick the second one. So that should be the goal. And because at the end of the day, like, your boss's opinion, unless you have some like devoted, like passionate duty for being at your job or performing your work, all that really matters is what your supervisor thinks of you. Because the sooner you get raises, the sooner you can start putting that money away, the sooner that money starts compounding, the sooner you can get out of the 9-to-5, the sooner you can get out of corporate America. If that's your goal. I mean, maybe some people have a passion project for their job, and this advice might not be the best, but that would be the 3 topics that I would recommend our listeners at home follow if they want to be successful at their job. Now, I do have a couple bonus tips outside the 3 topics. Bonus tip number 1, if you're a minority, make it known. And I say this one from experience. At my corporate job, I have been told point blank on more than one instance that I cannot have certain jobs because of my race, because I was mistaken as being white. So, well, I am white, but I'm also Mexican. Sure. I also have Mexican heritage. I grew up in a Spanish-speaking home. Okay. And once I cleared that up with my manager at the time, or my soon-to-be manager, I actually got the position. So if you have a Mexican card to play, if you have a black card to play, if you have a whatever card to play, definitely play it, especially if it's a big company. It's only going to help you out. One last piece of advice is to think out loud. And I think this also applies to more than just business, but think out loud with like your decisions. Like, if you're a decision maker in a given situation, in a meeting, in a Zoom call, like whatever, don't just say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to do this. And then everyone just says, okay, and you move on. Like, just talk out loud. Like, well, I think we should do this because like it makes sense that this is on this side, this is on that side. I think it makes sense to meet in the middle. You like show your work. And as long as you're showing your work for your decisions, the people in the meeting can either refute your logic for your decisions, or they have an understanding because they understand that it's based in logic at that point and not just an arbitrary, like, okay, we're doing this, it's my way or the highway, like, deal with it. So that would be my advice for how somebody in today's society can survive and thrive in corporate America.
And thrive. Very good. I like protecting your downside, which I think was the first one that you said. It's more important to avoid
Don't be a hero.
mistakes. Yeah, don't be a hero. And I would say, I think that there's definitely some truth to that. I think, the old joke that I've heard before and that I've put it out a few times is the idea that, as long as you can play the game tomorrow, you're all right. As long as you don't die, as long as you don't go bankrupt, as long as your finances don't collapse, whatever money you lost, as long as you still have enough to get through to tomorrow, you're okay. I got that from Nassim Taleb, actually, talking about when he was a trader, or when he was with other traders. That was always the metric they would use. Is, did you have a good day? So if you come back tomorrow, you had a good day. You just gotta get through the day. And especially if you think about, if you're working at a large facility like I know where you work at, if you think about how expensive some of the equipment there really is, it's probably much more important to not destroy anything. It can be a real big deal if a reactor goes, or a cooling tower goes, or some kind of, whatever processing equipment. These are like millions of dollars in capital costs that are being used. It's probably preferable to not break anything versus pushing something to the limit and hoping it doesn't break. Like, I would imagine not breaking is pretty high on people's agenda when they go to work every day.
Yeah, you gotta. If you picture it, it's like you're building a wall. It's like you're building a wall brick by brick, and then sometimes you mess up and a brick gets taken away from your wall, and sometimes you do the right thing and like bricks get added to your wall. But any one individual like mess up or fuck up, like, it's not gonna hurt you. Like, even there's a popular phrase in the media that bad press only lasts for like a week max. So don't get too encumbered if you see a couple bricks fall out of your wall, but you just have to have a good system in place where you're keeping things flowing, you're keeping things moving, and you just keep adding brick by brick to that wall. And then eventually, after a few years, that wall is going to be pretty fucking big.
I also like the lubrication one, keeping things moving. I think this has universal applicability outside of even just working, but I like this one a lot as well. The idea of acting like a lubricant, and the idea, of all the things that's important to be these days, I really appreciate people who are punctual, who are on time, who make deadlines. That to me is a crucial thing. I think by the time you're an adult, you ought to be responsible for your schedule. You made the joke before about Joko Willink, who could get hit by an ambulance and still arrive on time to the meeting. Like, that's, you should
hit by an ambulance.
Yeah, hit by an ambulance. You ought to be able to be on time for things, and you ought to be able to meet deadlines. I think by the time you're working, by the time you're an adult, that seems like a reasonable expectation for people. And outside of even work, it seems like a good expectation for anybody in any situation of their life. Be on time for things. Pretty simple request. Anybody can do it. We all have that capacity in our lives to do it. And it makes things run smoother. I think it makes things run smoother when you're trying to get things accomplished.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a real important one. That's probably like 60% of the equation, if not more. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who was he's a technician at a company, and he was talking about how he was excelling in his own group and his own projects. And I asked him like what he thought the reason for his success was, and he said, literally, I just show up. Like, literally, I just show up on time to things, and that's all it takes. Because half the people can't even do that. Half the people can't even show up or like meet deadlines. So
I think we all have our first experience with poor punctuality when you begin doing group work in whether high school or college. For some people, we've all been in the situation of divvying up the work. Everybody has a deadline. You can count on it. Maybe a third of the team, maybe half of the team. As you get further in college, this is less of a problem. Really more like freshman, sophomore year, where you're taking a bunch of random classes plus your core classes. just pay attention to how many people can't reach a deadline. I mean, it is astonishing. It is astonishing. Or
astounding.
Astounding. It's astounding, really. It's frightening. Who, let me give an example with taxes. I pay my taxes early every year, without fail, every year.
I still haven't paid mine.
Yeah, I pay mine early every year. When you prioritize things, or when you're punctual with things, it makes your own life easier. I mean, that's what you come to realize. Deadlines are stressful because you're procrastinating, and if you don't, they're less stressful. And so if you're a freshman in college, or if you're a sophomore in college, and you're thinking, what can I do to make my time here more enjoyable? The first tip: do the reading. The second tip: be punctual. Just be organized. Just be punctual. That is at least half of the game for anybody in college right now. And if you're in a group and doing group work, get it done on time. Don't be the asshole who's always late submitting things, or doesn't have it ready or something. Or don't do that. Get it done.
Yeah, meet those deadlines. And another thing, and this might be a little bit more of a controversial take, but there's a lot of
why start being controversial now, right? I mean, why?
That's right. This is Joe's briefcase here. Like, we can be as controversial as we want.
It's only Joe's briefcase and not my briefcase. Anyway, Joe, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, throw that little disclaimer in there.
Yeah.
So a lot of times especially with big companies, there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of business processes that just don't make sense. Like, there's no logic behind it. And this is something that I failed at doing earlier in my career, or something that I did earlier in my career, was they would lay out a plan, they would lay out a strategy or something that just literally doesn't make any sense. They would try to put on some system that would generate a lot more work for other people and really wouldn't gain us anything. And I used to poke holes at it. Like, I used to be like, okay, hi, yeah, this doesn't make sense. Like, what are we going to do here? And I would be that squeaky wheel, if you will. And I learned that being the squeaky wheel only leads to pain. It only leads to stress. It only leads to more work for you. It doesn't lead to any real change in the system. Yeah. It just leads to turmoil.
let me throw a proposition out for you. Never raise. I'm not saying I believe this, but I'm thinking maybe you would believe this. Never raise a problem that you are not willing to fix.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent way.
That's basically what you're saying, right?
That's an excellent way of putting it.
Yeah.
But it's almost a little bit more than that. Like, even if it is something I'm willing to fix, it's a net loss for me. It's bricks taken out of my wall because I'm being the squeaky wheel. I'm making a deal. I'm changing the plan. Now the boss has to replan the whole event or the whole strategy. And maybe it helps out the company in the long run. Doesn't help out me in the long run. Doesn't help me out in the short term. So nowadays, I hate to say it, like, it doesn't make sense, but I literally second guess, like, correcting mistakes that I hear in meetings, like, just bad processes, bad things. I just, whatever, not worth my stress.
Yeah.
I'm just going to bite my lip. I'm going to do what they say. I don't agree with it. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. But you know what?
Well, let's we're going
to keep the wheel spinning.
Right. So let's take this and formulate it in a way that's more positive than just not bring up the negative, which would be, I think, something to the following, like, when you're starting a company, when you're in a company, when it's growing, processes that made sense when the company was small or growing may not make sense as the business gets bigger. And a process can be bad and still work, and that isn't a reason to ignore it. And I think there's just, I've encountered this myself, where a lot of companies these days are running pretty hard and, trying to be lean and very efficient. But what that takes away is the ability to revisit systemic issues in the company, because nobody, like basically what you're saying, nobody wants to be the one to have that debt fall on, because it's not clear what they're really going to get from it. And especially if it's only a process that is ancillary to whatever group they're in, they might not really care. And so I think, we've been kind of throwing around the idea of getting some people on the show that are in the process of starting their own companies. And I think an interesting question for them would be, look, how do you plan on incorporating scaling into processing, and communication, throughout the chain, whatever it may be. How do you plan on doing that as your company grows? Because I imagine a lot of things that work well for like 5 people work very poorly for like 10,000 people. I would suspect that would be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be very interesting to talk to some of these people about. I think that's some good foreshadowing for some future episodes.
Yes, stay tuned.
I would like to make one distinction, that this strategy that I've just outlined is it's applicable to a corporate job that you're just using as a way to make money and achieve your own financial independence or whatever.
Sure.
Once you start getting into your own businesses, your own companies, your own passion projects, all this goes out the door. Like you don't have to declare your ethnicity for your own passion project or business. Like it's irrelevant at that point, right?
Right.
And then like if it's your own project, like you don't have to make an honest effort to make deadlines. It just comes naturally. It comes packed with its own motivation to do so. And you can start calling out things that don't make sense, like bad processes. Like that's encouraged. In fact, right. It might be the exact opposite of the advice I laid out for these startup small businesses,
right.
Especially if they're yours
or just any
influential part.
Right. Any job that you care about, it would make sense to put in. Yeah. I like that too.
I for the record, I do care about my job.
I believe you.
At least for the time being.
This is always under the guise of satire when Joe talks about his corporate life.
Actually, anything that I say that sounds bad, let's just count under the guise of satire. From this point forward.
I'll just stop recording right now. Let's talk about FaceTime. I like FaceTime. I think this is a good idea. I think FaceTime is important for a lot of reasons, and I mean, all the persuasion points you raised earlier is good as well. Let me give another reason why I think FaceTime is important with whether it be your supervisor, but also your coworkers, is especially now everything feels disconnected because a lot of things are going virtual and going on Zoom. I still think that there are some problems that are just much easier to solve with people in a room together than it is over a computer or over email. I mean, I still think that. I don't know if I'm the only one who does, but I mean, to me, if I look at problems that people are trying to handle over email, and it seems like it would take 2 minutes to do in person, I think FaceTime is valuable for that reason as well. There are some things where technology is just a huge pain in the ass, and just talking to somebody in person completely alleviates all of those problems. And a good example of that would just be anytime you need like a yes or no answer from something. It seems sometimes email is a good way to get that, but if it's a hard email to like articulate, or if it's a question about a thing that you've been spending a lot of time talking about and you're worried that your email won't have enough background information or something like that, I think sometimes just an in-person conversation where you can provide information as needed is a nice place to be in as well. And I think it just makes things more efficient sometimes than trying to go over the email or text or phone call or whatever else it may be. And that phone call would be closer to an in-person meeting as well.
Yeah. And I think that the reason for that is because, well, largely the facts just don't matter. Like they seem like they matter. Like the company makes it seem like they matter. But at the end of the day, it really just comes down to how people feel about you. And for example, like if you ask like a tough question over email, like the people don't really get to see the face behind the person asking the questions, and that would subconsciously influence the answer they give. But if you are in that FaceTime, if you are with them in a room, it's a lot easier to come to terms with each other. It's a lot easier for each party to compromise when you're looking across the table from someone. Now, I do. Okay, you were talking about that, the emails. It's funny because there is like a meme in circulation or like a little saying on the internet that I see that's like, oh, this could have been an email or something.
Oh, okay. Right.
You know what I mean? Have you seen that?
I can imagine what the meme is making fun of. That you
it's like a picture. Yeah, it's like a picture of Bernie Sanders like posting up at like the State of the Union or something. And it's like total discontent on his face, and it's like this could have been an email.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it's like, so maybe there's not as much truth to that meme as people suspect there is, just based off what we just talked about.
Yeah, I can just think times in myself where I thought I was being really clear over email, and just
Yeah, that's not a thing.
completely,
It's impossible.
no, I just completely abominated or just abolished, whatever I was trying to talk about. It's even so like where I work out, we also have an IM app as well built in. We have Microsoft Teams. It's just like an IM chat thing too. And there are times where I'll think, I have a great, this is perfect Teams message, and it's a real quick thing. I'll be brief. I'll get it in there, send it, respond. Like, yeah, exactly. Response, what? I was like, well, I thought I was being clear, but I wasn't. And I just completely confused the other person.
It's like, I think we need to escalate this. Exactly. I've seen that.
Yeah.
Like you spend all this time writing a beautiful, well-crafted email.
Yeah.
You send it out thinking it's going to be a hole-in-one, easy money.
Yeah.
And then, you just get smashed. It's
really hard. It's a really useful skill to be able to put yourself in someone else's perspective. And it is not a skill that I have yet. I'm working on it, but I don't have it yet. And that's life. That's getting there. All right, let's go to thinking out loud. So explain this one again. So when you said thinking out loud, I was imagining in my head what I thought you were going to say was different than what you ended up saying. So kind of just a quick summary of thinking out loud, and then let's dive into it a little bit more.
So thinking out loud, aka showing your work, is where as you like talk through your decision making process, because in meetings you have to make decisions. That's the point of meetings, is to make decisions.
Right.
And there's nothing worse than someone that just arbitrarily makes decisions saying, we're doing this because I said so, or we're doing that because I said so. And it's often hard to make decisions in these meetings, at least for me personally, because it's like there's a lot of good points on both sides. Like there's a lot of forces on either side, and it's not really that apparent to me what is the right decision. So instead of just taking a gamble and picking one side and running with it, like I think there's a utility in just talking through it. Like, okay, we got XYZ reason on this side, XYZ reason on this side. I'm kind of leaning this way for this reason. And then it gives it makes everyone else feel involved. Like you're showing your work. People can see how you arrived at that decision. Maybe they'll be more fired up to follow through on it because they understand where it came from. And it's just, I don't think a lot of people think that way. I think a lot of people just think like, oh, I'm in charge here. This is my decision to make. I'm just going to do it. We're going to run with it, and everyone's going to like it.
Okay, so that I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. In a sense, it kind of sounds like what could also evolve from that is that by thinking out loud, you may actually engage the group in a conversation about the thought process that could lead to another solution that you kind of began. And I always feel like one thing we've talked about before is how we attach ourselves to our ideas, even though we probably shouldn't do that. And if you present an idea as your idea and somebody challenges it, that's going to feel hurtful to you. Versus if you present your idea as the starting point of a conversation and you expect it to change as it is discussed out loud among other people, maybe that's a way to kind of inoculate yourself a little bit against the feeling of having your idea attacked. If you start off by framing it as the starting point, maybe you'll be more open to people's criticism of that idea that you're trying to work towards into some solution.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think that the biggest thing that holds people back in their jobs is their emotional response to things. Like that, exactly what you just mentioned. Like people are afraid to throw out their opinions because they're afraid those opinions are going to get ridiculed and they're going to take it personally. So by showing your work, it separates your ideas from you and puts them out there, and then people can attack it and you don't get offended.
Yeah. And I think
that's a great point.
I think that's a thing that we could all be better at doing. And in a way, it's kind of like we were talking about a book earlier. I think all of us need to get better at seeing whatever space we're in as the starting point and not the finish line. I think a lot of conversations go poorly because somebody shows up to the conversation with the finish line in mind rather than the starting line in mind. And it's hard to have a conversation when you think you already have the answer. And it's even harder if the other person thinks that they have the answer. And it's even harder when those answers aren't the same. So if you could convince yourself that you were always at the beginning of something. Peter Thiel talks about protecting the starting of a company, because it's when it's starting that it can be the most nimble, the most agile, it can change itself the most. Protecting the starting is really important. And a little microcosm of that is in any conversation. Protecting the starting of the conversation, where you're framing things, where you're explaining where you're coming from, where you're outlining your own biases or whatever it may be. That is an important part of the conversation to protect, because once you move on from that and you've kind of embedded these things, it's very hard to go back. And that's what I think where a lot of arguments come from, is not taking enough time framing the important starting blocks. I said starting line earlier because I'm a fucking idiot. Starting blocks of the conversation will help it go a little more smoothly.
Well, I like that. Setting the stage
Yeah.
is what you're talking about. And another way to start the stage for meetings, in my opinion, is schedule them for shorter. Do a 15-minute meeting. Like, don't schedule it for a full hour. Because guess what? If you schedule a meeting for a full hour, it's gonna fucking go the full hour. If you schedule it for 30 minutes, it's only gonna go 30 minutes.
Meetings
schedule
for 15. Vacuum. Right. Yes. Right.
It's only gonna go 15. Like, and you're gonna achieve the same thing, whether it's 15, 30, an hour.
Yeah.
It's just you're gonna waste a lot more time with the hour.
Yeah. No, I like all of these. Let me give, so you brought up diversity earlier. Let me do a little IND. So I had a really good, and so I'm saying IND, let me not use the terminology, inclusivity, diversity. The way that we've had this explained to us, diversity is the makeup of the company, but inclusion is about making sure that people in the company feel welcome and that they feel that their input is valuable. And I think you would agree, I think that that's important, that whoever you're working with, everyone's input needs to be respected, everyone's input needs to be valued. And I think diversity is really easy to measure, but inclusivity is much harder. It's really hard to make sure that when you're in a meeting, when you're with a group of people, especially when it's coworkers, I know you work at a big company, you may be meeting people for the first time, and it can be really
every
day, right? It can be really hard when you have a diverse group of people to make sure that we're all doing our part to make every voice heard, and that we're making sure that people's opinions are being heard as well. We were just talking a moment ago about thinking out loud. A problem that I have is I'm typically a very loud voice in a room. I'm what people call extroverted. And the problem with that is oftentimes I'm also the dumbest voice in the room. And so when you give the dumbest voice in the room the loudest microphone, you're crowding out a whole lot of people. And part of being inclusive is making sure that people like me don't do that, that we don't, you talk forever and never give anybody a chance to speak. Yeah. I know you have no idea what that's like. But,
hog the spotlight.
It's important not to do that. And of course, in the IND framework, it means making sure that that everybody's voice is heard in a meeting. And I know my wife is a female engineer, and she always tells me how important that is. And then it's really easy to kind of not notice it. And it's really easy to assume, oh, well, maybe that person's just quiet, or maybe that person doesn't have anything to bring to the table. It's important to make that extra step and in a sense, make sure that that's the case and not just assume it. Because, look, I think all of us in our different ways are trying to work towards a more inclusive, more diverse world. And part of these stepping stones to do that is not just to have people in the room, but to make sure, the analogy that my company uses is the idea of, it's not just about inviting somebody to the dance, but making sure that they're also dancing. That's a nice way to kind of visualize it. I kind of like that. It's a nice way to kind of frame it in our heads. Let me ask you this. Why did you pick briefcase?
Briefcase.
Did you bring a briefcase to work?
No, I bring a backpack to work. But
you're one of those
backpack
people.
One of those what?
Let me tell you something. I am all about diversity, except for people that bring backpacks to work. I have no respect for you. You don't belong. That is for school, Joe.
Well, Work is a learning process, Jim.
I can't believe it. I want everybody who's still bringing a backpack to, and let me show you, all right, explain to me this. I see people who do this. They have a backpack, but they carry it by the top handle. What is that? What are they doing? Can you explain that to me? Why not buy a
I don't know.
briefcase? Do you wear your
At least get some
backpack?
rollers for it.
Do you wear your backpack on the straps at least?
Yeah, of course. Sometimes I do
right?
like the cool guy one strap, but yeah, most of the time it's two.
Let me tell you about that one strap.
Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you.
I don't want to hear it.
Okay, let me tell you why backpacks are good.
Fine,
Backpacks are good for one reason. Pockets. Pockets.
What?
A briefcase is just
Are you going
one
to
big
battle?
cavity.
Are you a Navy
It's
SEAL?
one big cavity.
One big cavity. So it's a cavity in your mouth. Doesn't make it a good thing. Who gives a shit?
It's not a good thing.
Hole? Yeah, that's my point. Not
big
a good
old hole.
Oh wait, the briefcase is a big old hole.
Look, the briefcase is just one big cavity. There's nothing else to put things in. Like you need to be able to put your mouse in a different pocket than your pens. Like if you put your pens in with like your notebooks, what if your pen explodes? Oh, great! Your whole cavity is covered in ink.
Every briefcase has a slot on the flap for pens and pencils. Every single one. You're not buying. What are you talking about? This is like a regulation. That's probably required. Probably a law.
I'm just saying. Do you want like
wearing backpacks? And I think that these people need to grow up. That's what I think. People need to stop living the past.
Even if they're just doing the one strap method?
Why would you do the one strap method? The only benefit of a backpack would be to use two straps. Why would you do the one strap? Why wouldn't you buy a messenger bag? Those fucking horrible ass things. You ever see somebody bike with one of those things where it's just crashing into their knee? I mean, that's got to be the worst fucking invention of all time.
It's the ultimate hipster move.
Those are the worst invention of all time. I say go briefcase, go backpack if you feel the need, I guess. But those messenger bags, I mean, no, that is a scam. That's a scam. It's like erasable pens. It's just a complete scam.
Well, what does that do for your posture? What does that do for your ergonomics?
No, yeah, pulling you to one side, like Quasimodo walking. Yeah. It's not going to be good for anybody. Can you imagine that?
Quasimodo.
It's what you're doing with your one strap. You're gonna walk around looking like you got hit by a twister or something. You're gonna look horrible. And listen, you know how bad my back is. Imagine if I had a backpack on, I'd be in a wheelchair for crying out loud. My God.
Yeah, you'd be upright.
I'd be upright. I'd be uptight. I'd be sick. I'd be dead. What else do I have written down here? Still improv, people. We don't do any scripting on this show.
None at all.
We have an album of the week that we'll end on in just a second. Let me go to one more thing. I was thinking about myself. I was thinking about, speaking of people like myself, sometimes we complain too much. And I imagine, oh God, I hope I'm wrong, but I imagine some of our listeners might be in high school. I fucking hope that I'm wrong. But maybe college, let's hope. And I imagine most of our audience is imaginary. But if they're real, I was thinking, let's all think of some questions we can ask. Let's take questions that are kind of low energy questions and transforming them into high energy questions. And one low energy question that we hear a lot, that we probably have said a lot, is when am I going to use this? When am I going to use this? You're in school, you're learning. When am I going to use this? Well, let me give you a better approach. I may have said this before, but it's worth repeating. Rather than asking that loser thing kind of question, and that's loser thing. When can I use this? Closed mind, not a lot of imagination. Why not ask yourself, how can I use this? You're going to be in school anyways. You may as well make the most of it. And if you are in a classroom where people are teaching you something, think of how you can apply it. Don't think that you can't. Think of how you can.
You could apply it on the test.
You can apply it on the test. You can apply it on the podcast with one of your good friends.
There you go.
You do a lot of good things. So that's the challenge, thinking not when, but how you can use information as it comes your way. Okay, I said we had an album of the week. So because we are recording on Friday, our album of the week will not be ready until a little bit later on. And we are going to post the album of the week as a separate short video sometime next week. So keep a lookout for that. Joe, I think we have gotten a lot of good press, a lot of good response to our albums of the week. Tell us a little bit about the feedback we've been getting so far from these uploads.
Oh, phenomenal engagement. Actually, on our the official Roses and Rhetoric Instagram handle, Roses_Rhetoric. As you know, we always post the album of the week on there along with the review. And we got some attention from some of the actual artists from a recent post. For one of our most recent albums, I think it was from about 2 weeks ago, Golden Hour Silent Mile by Daniel Rosen. The drummer from the album actually reached out and liked the video. Blue check drummer, tens of thousands of subscribers, along with the multi-Grammy award winning trombone player featured on the album as well, Frank Cohen. So I just want to give a shout out to Frank Cohen and Eric Slick, the drummer, for the engagement and the respect that they've been giving to our album of the week. Our musical correspondent works very hard on these reviews and these album selections, and I'm happy to see that he's getting some positive feedback from the artists themselves.
And I really like the tastings that he gives as well. I know that you like that part of the review as well. And yes. I'm curious, as our channel grows, I'm curious to see how many people start kind of engaging with those tasting suggestions and putting them into practice, let's say. I'm really looking forward to that as well. So no doubt about it, we'll have a good album of the week write-up coming up for some time middle week. A little sneak peek at the album is called Ki-oku, and it's by DJ Krush. And so if anybody Krush with a K. So if anybody wants to listen to that now and prepare yourself for the write-up, feel free to do so, of course. And it should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that album. I've really only had good suggestions for AOWs, so I'm looking forward to this one as well. I want to give one more shout out, Joe, and it's one of our early guests on the show, and it's Jack Urness over at the Rose Best podcast. We've been having a lot of fun with Jack, engaging on Twitter, and so anybody listening here, be sure to check out Jack's podcast as well. Also follow Jack on Twitter. He's following us, so you'll see him in our follow people. But great guy, great show. Be sure to follow him, this friend Reno, on the World's Best podcast. And Joe, I'm looking at my notes, and I believe that is everything that I had written down for today's show. A clean bill of health for the show. Clean bill of health for the show. Anything you wanted to add before we close out?
No, all out of improv for today.
All out of improv. I would say that we did not crash and burn. It was a bumpy landing, perhaps a nice smooth gliding into the Hudson, just like our good friend
Tom Hanks.
No, everybody survived as far as I know, and everybody survived here as far as I know. So no, a lot of fun today. Joe's new segment, Joe's Briefcase. I'm sure they'll be making an appearance in a theater near you. But be sure to follow us. I'll get this out real quick. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Roses_Rhetoric. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, same, and then Joe as well at Jose4_Squarevo, and then also our website, www.rosesandrhetoric.com. I'm Jimmy Haggis signing out for Joseph Sanford. Until next time, ciao.